2021 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We're very excited to welcome the public to in-person participation for the first time in well over a year. Those not attending in person can access the meeting through the Zoom link webinar provided on the agenda. A recording of this meeting will be available at the PCTPA website. This meeting is being conducted via teleconference under Executive Order N2920. We appreciate your participation and your patience with this technology and with the chair. Public comment. There will be multiple opportunities throughout this meeting for public comment. After I open an item up for public comment, those joining us by webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raised hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. For those joining us in person, you're welcome to come to the podium. We ask that anyone making a public comment state their name and city of residence. You'll then have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and we'll notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you experience technical difficulties or are unable to provide public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to Sylvie Sable, our clerk, at ssabol@pctpa.net. Board action. Because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members, we ask that you state your name prior to making a motion or second a motion for the record. Once an item has been moved and seconded, I'll request that the clerk call the roll to a vote. Thank you, and if you'd all please stand and join us, being led by Rick Carter, our new Deputy Executive Director, in the Pledge of Allegiance. Rick?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rick. Mike, would you like to make an introduction?
Sure. So as you stated, Mr. Chair, we're very excited to have our new Deputy Executive Director here today. He started on Monday. His name is Rick Carter. He comes to us from Sacramento County and is going to be a great addition to our staff. With that, I'll maybe let Rick say a couple things about himself.
Good morning, Chair Joyner and board members. I'm excited to be here. I am on just day 3, so I'm still very much getting up to speed. But I'm already getting familiar with the great projects and activities that the PCTPA has, and I'm excited to be part of the team and to start working with all of you and all of your agencies and staff on the many good projects that are before us and activities. A little bit on my background. I've been in this region for about 27 years working in the transportation sector. Started my career at Caltrans as a design engineer. Worked for El Dorado County as a project manager. Worked for City of Elk Grove as their capital program manager, kind of running all phases of project delivery as well as transportation funding and programming. As Mike mentioned, most recently with Sacramento County. I spent about the last decade of my career heavily involved with transportation funding and programming. Worked extensively with SACOG. Also have experience with Sacramento County's sales tax measure. Worked on both their 2016 campaign and kind of the recent efforts in 2020. A lot of background also with development impact fees similar to Sparta. So I think this position fits very well with my background, and I'm excited to kind of hit the ground running and work with all the partners to help improve transportation in Placer County.
Well, welcome, Rick. We're very excited to have you here. I think you're going to be a great addition to the team.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you so much. With that, we'll move on to roll call. Sylvie?
Amara? Baker?
Here.
Broadway?
Here.
Holmes? Here. Howdy-Schelt?
Here.
Joyner?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Wilkins?
Present.
Okay, and I believe Trinity is going to join us a little later.
All right.
I am on the meeting, but I am going to have to jump off between 9:30 and 10, and I will be back.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to approval of action minutes for May 26, 2021. Anyone have any changes to the minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion for approval.
Broadway second.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie, roll call, please.
Amara? Baker?
Aye.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Holmes? Howdeshelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Wilkins?
Yes.
All right, passes unanimously. We'll move on to agenda review. Any members of the board wishing to change anything on the agenda?
I have none.
Mr. Chair, we do have one change staff is recommending to the agenda.
Okay.
The item I, the traffic congestion report presentation, staff would like to defer that until the next meeting.
All right. Very good. Everyone all right with that?
Good.
Getting out into cyberspace, looks like we're good there too. So we'll go ahead and move on then to public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda to do so. If you're here in-house, please feel free to come to the podium. If you are online, staff will call your name when they're ready to have you speak. Anyone wishing to speak on an item not on today's agenda?
Mr. Chair, we do have one individual who's calling in who would like to speak.
All right.
Okay, go ahead and please unmute yourself, Mr. Garabedian.
Well, good morning, PCTPA members. Congratulations on having your first sit-down meeting where the public can be present there with you. I'm watching on Zoom myself, and that's what I wanted to say a sentence or two about, is the importance of the public being at these meetings and knowing about them. And my experience is there usually aren't members of the general public here, or often I may feel like I'm one of the few or only ones. And I suggest that you figure out how to get, make sure there's opportunities for and the public knows about the meetings and that there can be more involvement. Perhaps not required by law, of course, but you post the agendas or announce meeting topics, important meeting topics, and there are so many here, so the public can know about them and that this is a place to come. So that's my public comment. I'm glad to be able to make this morning.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Garabedian, and welcome.
Mr. Chair, I don't see any other hands raised.
All right. Thank you. With that, then, we will move on to item F, consent calendar, Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Any members of the board wishing to remove an item for discussion?
I have none.
No? No one out in cyberspace either?
Howdeshelt moves consent calendar.
All right. Do I have a second?
Burris, second.
Is that Burrows?
Burris, yeah. Amara? Baker?
Aye.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Holmes?
Yes.
Howdeshelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Wilkins?
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
All right. We move on to item G, a public workshop, the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan Update and associated environmental documents. Don't see a name on this one. We're going to start with you, David.
Start with me. Good morning, members of the Airport Land Use Commission. So today we're asking you to conduct a public workshop to obtain public input on proposed draft Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that covers Auburn Municipal Airport and Lincoln Regional Airport. And at the conclusion of today's presentation which will be approximately 20 minutes, and then after Q&A and you get public input, we're asking you to authorize the executive director to release the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan for a 30-day public review period, as well as the two negative declarations and draft environmental studies for the Auburn and the Lincoln Airport Land Use Compatibility Plans. So with that, the way the presentation will kind of work today, we have an agenda for our presentation here. I will cover the background and a little bit about the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan update. At that point, I will turn it over to Miranda Thompson, who is our project manager from Mead and Hunt, who is the consulting firm that is working on the plan update and worked on the 2014 plan. And I believe even actually worked on the 2000 plan. I don't know if she goes that far back, but the firm did. And we will.
Nicely played, by the way.
What's that?
Well done.
Okay. Yeah, well, sometimes. And then we'll cover CEQA findings, and we'll then review the next steps, and then any questions and answers, questions from the board members, and then we would recommend that you open it up for public input. Okay, so, yeah, you've all heard presentations from me in the past with respect to the Airport Land Use Commission, so many of you are very familiar with the role of the Airport Land Use Commission and the responsibilities. But for the benefit of the public that's viewing today or in the audience, the responsibility of the Airport Land Use Commission by statute is to protect the public health and safety and welfare of people that fly into the airports, as well as the people that are on the ground, in the vicinity of an airport. And our charge is to conduct what's called airport land use compatibility planning. That means we work with the local jurisdictions as well as the airport operator to ensure that land use planning that occurs around airports is compatible with the airport operations, and likewise airport operations are compatible with proposed land use plans in the vicinity of an airport. So we would then adopt an airport land use compatibility plan, and as appropriate, amend an airport land use compatibility plan. Amendments typically occur when master plans or airport layout plans are updated for particular airports, which is the case here. Another charge is to promote orderly development and minimize land use conflicts. And then we also review, it says here, certain local agency actions according to the plan that you all have adopted. These are discretionary actions, so ministerial type actions like a building permit review would not come before this body unless it's voluntarily referred to this body for review. And then lastly, we determine consistency, and there have been many consistency reviews over the past year with housing elements and safety elements, as well as major development projects. And so we've all been through those hearings, and so I think you're well versed with that process. Importantly, the Airport Land Use Commission has limitations, and these limitations are identified in state statute, the Public Utilities Code. So we have no authority over existing airport operations. So it's the airport operator that, in this case, City of Lincoln, City of Auburn, that are responsible for airport operations, and they work with the FAA because the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, controls airspace. Airspace is considered part of the federal domain. The Airport Land Use Commission has no authority over existing land uses. So our charge as a land use commission, Airport Land Use Commission, is looking at redevelopment of land as well as new development of land to make sure that those proposed changes are compatible with airport operations. So it's future-oriented in many ways. And we have no direct ability to implement the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. The Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan has a variety of criteria that deals with noise, safety, overflight, as well as airspace protection. Airspace protection is like height restrictions. The implementation occurs by the local jurisdictions. This is the way it was set up in state statute because local jurisdictions have the land use authority. And so as part of the land use authority, there will be later this fall, we will come back before the board recommending to you general plan consistency determinations for the cities of Auburn, Lincoln, and Placer County. And at that point in time, the local jurisdictions will implement the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. And the only types of actions that we will see will be what I refer to as mandatory actions, mandatory because they're identified in state statute. Those are like general plan amendments, specific plan amendments, or rezones, because you're changing a land use in that regard. And so then we have to look at that from a perspective of compatibility.
So David, before you move on, just for the public, I think those last three bullet items are very important to keep in mind as we move to public comments. There are areas that we do have authority over and other areas that we do not. So while we're happy to listen to your comments, if the comment is perhaps noise related, something like that, it isn't an area that we have authority over. And so in the city of Lincoln, that would be the city, and the same here in Auburn. So,
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so I actually already covered local agency responsibility. So, you know, the one action here that I did not address is that in the instance when an airport land use commission makes a consistency determination, you know, within state law, it allows the local jurisdiction to override that airport land use commission action. And the override requires a supermajority vote. So that has occurred sometime in the past, you know, but not frequently. So it usually is a very controversial sort of step to go through. So as staff, we try to work things out at staff level and with applicants before you get to that particular point.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, David. If the council makes that decision to override, liability shifts.
Correct. Right. So yeah, the liability shifts to the jurisdiction. Now, just quickly, this is kind of like Airport Land Use Commission, Aviation Planning 101. So there's three sort of plans that we deal with here. You have airport plans, and the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, and of course, general plans, and which you're probably most familiar with, you know, being every jurisdiction has a general plan. So the geographic scope of an airport plan, so that's on airport property. You're dealing with the facilities with respect to the airport, and its purpose is to guide, you know, development of that airport, typically over a 20-year period. It's often referred to as a master plan, and then rather than periodic updates of the master plan, you'll see what are called airport layout plans, which are then submitted to the FAA for review, and those are used kind of to update the master plans. For an airport land use compatibility plan, you know, our geographic area is an airport influence area. And for each of these airports, it's approximately a 2-mile area surrounding the airport. And it's within that area that typically, like Placer County, will have a zoning designation called aircraft overflight. And so that encompasses the airport influence area. And so the purpose of the compatibility plan is to promote, you know, compatibility between land use and the airport. And then, of course, your general plan covers your entire city limits, and it guides land use development. And ultimately, when we do consistency between the compatibility plan and the general plan, the compatibility plan becomes kind of another element of the general plan in terms of looking at land use projects and development review. So, you know, lastly, you know, for the benefit of the public, you know, PCTPA, we were designated, you know, as the Airport Land Use Commission. This goes back to 1998, and our first plan was adopted in 2000, and we amended in 2014. The amendment in 2014 was due to master plan updates for the two airports, as well as a change in state guidelines, and so that was a significant update. Those of you who were on the board at that point in time can recall that you know, that was a pretty big effort, and there was a lot of public input at that point in time. So now we're proposing a further update of the compatibility plan because Auburn and Lincoln airports have updated their airport layout plans. And with that, I will turn it over to Miranda Thompson, who will walk us through the airport land use compatibility plan update.
Thank you, David. Good morning, commissioners. So the scope for this ALUCP update was to focus on the airport land use compatibility plans for Auburn and Lincoln airports because of the updates to their airport layout plans. For Blue Canyon, we'll talk about it a little bit more. That was not purposely included in this ALUCP update. because they have not changed their airport master plan or airport layout plan since the 2014 plan was approved by this commission. However, some of the revisions to the countywide policies would be applicable to Blue Canyon, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other focus area was to clarify certain ALUC policies. So since the 2014 plan has been adopted, questions have arose regarding the nuances or interpretations of some of the policies and criteria. So we worked with staff and the local agencies to provide clarification to those policies. We also focused on policy clarifications regarding how to address wildlife hazards, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then locally, there's been a movement towards streamlining infill development within the Placer County area, particularly around the jurisdictions, so the cities. And so we have identified some potential policies that are included in this proposed update. We also wanted to include some implementation tools to help ALUC staff and local jurisdictions to implement the compatibility policies of this plan. And lastly, we have been asked to look at the ALUC fee structure to determine if the review time required by staff is covered by the fees required by this commission. In accordance with the ALUC statutes, the Airport Land Use Commission establishes what is called an airport influence area, which David mentioned covers or addresses noise, airspace, overflight, and safety issues. But in establishing that airport influence area boundary, that needs to be done in coordination and consultation with the affected local jurisdictions. And to meet that objective of the statutes, we developed a project development team made up of airport and planning staff from Placer County, the cities of Auburn and Lincoln. We also had a planning representative from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG. They also function as the Airport Land Use Commission. And we also included Caltrans Division of Aeronautics, obviously PCTPA staff, and then we were involved as the consultant. And the primary objective for the project development team was to obtain background information that would be used as the basis of this compatibility plan update. The team also provided input and guidance on the policy revisions. And they also were charged in keeping their respective local jurisdictions updated on the progress of the ALUCP update. Now, in terms of the policy clarifications, I mentioned that since the 2014 compatibility plan was adopted, there had been some questions regarding implementation of some of the criteria. So we worked closely with the project development team to identify those areas, and we provided some clarification. We included some additional examples. In terms of the procedural policies, we more clearly identified the types of projects that would be subject to review by either ALUC, the ALUC executive director, or the planning commission itself. We made some technical revisions. For example, in the current 2014 plan, we reference the Airport Land Use Commission secretary. We've replaced that terminology with the ALUC executive director to more appropriately reflect the status or the designation of the executive director for PCTPA. We also looked at the wildlife hazard policies. We worked on some special condition exceptions, primarily for infill development. But it's also important to note that while we made some revisions to the countywide policies, the criteria, the compatibility criteria in the 2014 plan has not changed in terms of the density limits or intensity limits applicable within each of the compatibility zones. So now we'll focus on Lincoln Regional Airport first and talk about the ALP changes in this 2020 ALP draft, or ALP that was approved by the city. So what you see, the image on the left side is the 2007 airport layout plan, which is the basis of the 2014 compatibility plan. And the trapezoidal shape that you see is called a runway protection zone. On the right side, you'll see that runway protection zone has expanded under the 2020 ALP. And the purpose of that expansion is to provide enhanced instrument approach procedures to that runway end. Now, the consequence of a larger runway protection zone is shown here. And you see the blue is representing what's reflected in the 2014 compatibility plan, and to reflect the 2020 airport layout plan, RPZ, you can see that that zone is expanded, and that's shown in the red. So again, the purpose of this update is to reflect this new airport layout plan drawing approved by the City of Lincoln. Now, the consequence of a larger runway protection zone means that there is going to be a larger Zone A. And Zone A does extend off airport property and encompasses 2 parcels that are currently unincorporated Placer County, but within the city's sphere of influence. All of the other compatibility zones stay the same. We've also looked at some special exception areas around Lincoln Municipal or Regional Airport. We brought forward the special exception for the wastewater treatment facility, which is located to the south, and we've developed a new special exception to account for the Placer County Conservation Plan or program, and we'll talk about the details of that in a bit. So, as I mentioned, new policies have been prepared to help implement the FAA's guidance on addressing wildlife hazards around airports. The 2014 plan simply points the reader to the FAA's advisory circular, which is used by airports that are federally obligated, meaning they take in federal funding, and therefore they are obligated to follow the criteria and guidance provided by the FAA. That's a 200-page document, and for implementation purposes, it's difficult for someone who doesn't understand that particular guidance how to implement it. So one of the requests of this commission and the executive director is to provide some more specific guidance as to how to interpret the FAA wildlife guidance to these specific airports. So what we've done is defined a new zone called the Wildlife Hazard Critical Zone, and within that zone, the FAA criteria would be applied. And essentially what it does is it limits any land use or land use features that would attract hazardous wildlife to the airport environs, namely birds. And within Zone A that we talked about, which reflects the runway protection zones, that is the most critical area. And within that area, we recommend prohibiting any land use features that would attract wildlife, hazardous wildlife to that particular zone. So we're looking at ponds, open water, any high vegetation around such features that would allow for roosting and foraging by birds. We also define the type of criteria that would be applicable within the outer areas of this new hazard critical or wildlife hazard critical zone. And we worked very closely with the administrator of the Placer County Conservation Program and the local jurisdictions, for example, City of Lincoln, to develop these criteria. And we are happy to report that they are in agreement with the policies included in the proposed ALUCP update.
If I could just mention, I spoke with Greg McKenzie. Well, we have worked with Greg McKenzie quite extensively on development of these wildlife policies. And he couldn't be here today because he's got another meeting conflict dealing with federal officials, in terms of implementation of the PCCP. But he did say that, that I could say on his behalf that, we've worked cooperatively, and he's quite pleased with the effort in terms of where we started and where we are now with respect to wildlife policies that are being shown in the plan. And so I just add that.
Okay, thank you. And now we're moving over to Auburn. So here's a comparison of the two airport layout plans. The first one is dated 2012, and that is the basis of the 2014 compatibility plan. In that airport layout plan drawing, it did not show any proposed runway extensions. Under the 2019 airport layout plan drawing, it does show a runway extension. So the current length is 3,700 feet, and the proposal is to extend the runways at each end, so to the west and to the east, for an ultimate length of 4,300 feet. Now, what's important to know about these extensions is that it would not be used for landing of aircraft, but used for departures. So there's extra runway length that could be used to by pilots to gain a little higher altitude over the developed areas.
So before you move on, that bottom picture, I use pictures, was really helpful to me. What it indicates is that on takeoff roll, you're going to use that additional length. But as you can see on the right, on landings, you're still coming over the threshold and landing on the numbers. You're not
Correct.
using that additional
So
length
no
at all.
changes in that regard for landing operations. With the proposal to extend the airport's single runway, there is a consequence in terms of what that means to the compatibility zones that are currently established in the 2014 plan. So this is a comparison of the 2014 compatibility zones with the proposal included in this ALUCP update. And we've shown the underlying land uses. So Zone B1 is expanding further west, and to the southwest, you can kind of see that that wedge to the southwest near Highway 49. And the reason for that particular sliver there of Zone B1 is currently the airport has a fly-friendly program where it requests pilots, when safe to do so, to avoid a straight-out departure to the west, and rather take a departure to the southwest so that they can avoid overflight of the adjacent mobile home park. So we've accounted for that fly-friendly program here in the modification to Zone B1 to help protect that particular flight corridor. There's also a consequence to Zone C2 and D because of airspace restrictions associated with the runway extension. So you'll see that the airport influence area boundary has expanded slightly to the west and to the east. Most of those uses that you see there in yellow are rural residential uses. Neither the current compatibility plan or the proposed compatibility plan places any restrictions on the density of residential uses within zones C2 or D. The primary concern in these outer areas of the airport influence area boundary is anything that's very tall, maybe 200 feet in height. So here we show the expanded zones. Zone A expands to reflect the runway protection zones, but those RPZs remain entirely on airport, and we've talked about the changes to zones B1 and C2 and D.
If I could add just on the bottom of the slide there, as a note saying that Placer County will need to amend its aircraft overflight zoning because the airport influence area will expand. The zoning designation will need to expand to cover these additional areas that are now included in the airport influence area. And we work with the county staff, and they anticipate that once we do the Placer County consistency determination later this fall, that they'll initiate that zoning ordinance update. And it probably would be, say, spring of 2023 or midsummer 2023 before that would come before the Board of Supervisors. So.
Thank you. We also included some special exception areas, and that's covered in the crosshatched areas in Zone C and D. So the Sutter Faith Hospital has a current exception included in the 2014 plan, but we are proposing 2 additional site exceptions. One to cover the Placer County Government Center, which this commission approved that development plan, and we're simply bringing forward those that approval and reflecting that approval in this update. We also developed in coordination with Placer County and the City of Auburn new infill green zones. And there's 2 zones. The first one is located just east of Highway 49 and north of Bell Road, and it's called Infill Green Zone Mixed Use Residential. And then we have another zone west of Highway 49 called Infill Green Zone Multifamily Residential. Now, the purpose of this infill green zone is to recognize that Placer County Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution that would promote infill development within what they're calling infill green zones to provide more housing, to encourage electric vehicle trips, discourage people getting into their cars and driving to access different services and go shopping, etc. So we wanted to reflect that particular initiative for infill development, and the current compatibility plan prohibits multifamily residential in Zone C. This would be an exception, allowing multifamily residential within these designated infill green zones. The one that's defined as mixed-use residential would require that any future multifamily residential be associated with commercial industrial development. It has to be a mixed-use development. And then anything on the west side of 49, multifamily residential would be considered appropriate.
I could just kind of hover on this slide just for a moment. So we've worked pretty extensively, during the housing element discussion, for Placer County with Shauna Purvines and Alex Fish from Placer County with respect to development of this Green Means Go sort of infill designation for the airport land use compatibility plan. Because the housing element was proposing to do infill within this area here and add multifamily to areas that the current compatibility plan doesn't allow. And so the compatibility plan here as proposed will, I think, allow a range of multifamily from 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre. Now, under the housing element that the county has proposed, they would like to go up to 30 units per acre. And what we show here in the plan for special condition exception would be that anything above 20 units per acre, it's a policy decision. It would have to come before this Airport Land Use Commission, and on a case-by-case basis, you would have to hear the argument, take the facts in, and make a policy decision as to whether or not you'd want to allow something greater than 20 dwelling units. And so that's the way it's kind of structured right now. The county staff are comfortable with that approach, and I believe the housing element that includes working with the ALUC to develop such approach. So we've worked quite closely over the past couple of months to get to this point.
So this particular slide just shows where those exception areas reside or proposed, and the uses or the colored blobs in red identify the potential housing sites within that infill green zone, which is shown here as a green boundary. So we've covered some of those areas, trying to keep away from zone B1 and discouraging any of those red land commercial uses or multifamily uses within zone B1 and encouraging them outside of that zone, for example, within zone C1. In terms of the wildlife hazard, same approach taken for Lincoln is applied here for Auburn Municipal Airport. We've defined a new wildlife hazard critical zone, which is counterminous with the proposed airport influence area. So all of the related wildlife hazard policies would apply within the airport influence area. In terms of the implementation toolbox, that was a specific task charged to us, and we've developed some tools to help ALUC staff and the local jurisdictions implement this plan. One of the tools includes flows charts, which identifies what the process is, what types of projects need to be forwarded to the commission, and which ones could be reviewed by the executive director. So those are included in the appendices of this proposed compatibility plan. So now we'll shift into the CEQA findings. So based on the requirement of the California Environmental Quality Act and the decision related to the Muzzy Ranch case, basically every compatibility plan requires an initial study, an evaluation of the potential impacts to the environment. Now, this is a regulatory document. It's not a construction, of a project. So the focus is very different. And essentially what we're looking at is, would this compatibility plan, if adopted by the commission, have an impact or conflict with any of the underlying land uses and conflict with the general plans in place by the local communities. It focuses on the potential displacement of housing because of the importance of housing within California and the needs. We have to look closely at each impacted parcel and determine if there would be any displacement of housing in those areas. So looking at Lincoln Regional Airport, we talked about the expansion of Zone A, and Zone A prohibits the development of any future residential dwellings. There are existing uses there, rural residential uses. 2 parcels are affected. One's about 5 acres in size and the other is more than 10 acres in size. And with the proposal of this Zone A expansion, there's a potential to displace approximately 3 units within the county, and if we look at the city's specific plan, there's a potential displacement of 2 units. But when we look at the specifics of the parcels that are affected, the conclusion was that those displaced units could be accommodated elsewhere on the property and certainly elsewhere within the community and within the airport influence area. And therefore, it was determined that it would be a less than significant impact.
So when you say displaced, the existing uses are allowed, the residents, the structures are allowed.
That's correct. So it's any future housing that would be proposed on these parcels would not be able to be located within Zone A. Now, the city's ALP indicates the city's intention to acquire avigation easements, and those easements could specify that the structures, a dwelling unit, would need to be located outside of that particular zone. In terms of the Auburn Municipal Airport, there is no housing displacement within Zone A because it remains entirely on airport property, nor are there any displacements within Zone C2 and D because there are no density limitations on residential uses within those particular zones. So the focus is really on Zone B1, and you can see there are several parcels identified for commercial use. And under the county's general plan and zoning ordinance, commercial uses could allow multifamily residential uses, and Zone B1 would prohibit multifamily residential. So when we calculated what the potential theoretic displacement would be, it was approximately up to 47 units. Looking at the housing element for Placer County, there are no sites identified, or these particular sites are not identified as future housing sites for their housing element and to achieve their regional housing need allocations. Plus, if we consider the infill green zones that are included as part of this ALUCP update that would allow multifamily residential, it would reduce or minimize that displacement potential. And for those reasons, we found that this is going to be a less than significant impact for these unincorporated areas within Zone B1. So the conclusion here for the environmental documentations and initial studies is that minor changes would be needed to the general plans and zoning ordinances and specific plans for Lincoln, Auburn, and Placer County. For Auburn, the zones have expanded. So for example, the Placer County aircraft overflight zoning ordinance would need to reflect the larger set of zones. They would also need to include the new wildlife hazard policies. And for Lincoln, it would be the expansion of Zone A. In terms of the housing displacement, as I mentioned, there are some potential displacements, but both the county and the city of Lincoln have the ability to accommodate those potential displaced housing units elsewhere within the airport influence area and within the community. And for those reasons, there's the determination is that there's going to be a less than significant impact on the environment, and we're proposing filing a negative declaration for Lincoln and Auburn airports. For Blue Canyon Airport, because the countywide policy revisions are more technical in nature, and we are simply bringing forward the airport-specific policies in the current 2014 plan, we are proposing to file what is called a notice of exemption, that there is no impact to the areas within the Blue Canyon Airport influence area boundary.
So I'll cover next steps here, so as part of the wrap-up. So what we're ultimately asking you today is to authorize the release of the airport land use compatibility plan and the draft environmental documents. I emphasize draft, so they'll go through a 30-day review. Public will comment. I'm sure there'll be quite a bit of comment. We'll respond to those, and ultimately we'll be back before this board, hopefully in September. So in terms of public noticing, so we have this public workshop, as well as the 30-day period and 2 virtual workshops that will be held in July, were noticed on our website, and working with our consultant AIM, we're publishing through various social media. Of course, there are stakeholders for these airports, pilot associations, Lincoln has an airport committee, and of course, you all are stakeholders, planning commission members are stakeholders. So there have been interested citizens since 2014, and so, they've become my friends, and so, I have their emails, and so they've been, sent notices, and we published in the Auburn Journal, in the Lincoln Messenger, because we're required to publish in the newspaper within the airport influence area. And consistent with what we did in 2000, and 2014, we've mailed to all the property owners within the airport influence area. So we'll probably have people today comment because they received a public workshop notice. Those are about, right now, the county's grown, so we've mailed out 11,000 notices. So it's, quite a bit of people. We will conduct live public workshops for Auburn Municipal Airport, so specifically focused just on Auburn Airport on July 14th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. That'll be a virtual workshop held through Zoom. You all will receive invites, if you wish to participate. Lincoln Airport will do on July 15th, the next day, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And before leaving this page here, because the notice has gone out to property owners, you can imagine I've had probably a number of people who have called me and who have, so I spent probably the last week dealing with phone calls. And I just want to sum initially what people have expressed so that you just have that for benefit. People that primarily have called are from rural Lincoln and the Sheridan area with respect to Lincoln Airport. Also, people within the immediate vicinity of Auburn Airport, and then a number of folks who live within Christian Valley, which is, I guess, kind of northwest, of the airport. So generally, people, with respect to Auburn Airport, are concerned about noise, existing noise. And noise has been, from these residents' point of view, a long-standing issue. I mean, when I mean long-standing, I would say a 20 to a 30-year issue. And they feel frustrated that there isn't the mechanism in place to deal with that. And they want someone to do something. That's what government is for, and so they want government, to act and to fix it. There are some people who felt that the notice that went out was a little bit misleading because it talks about compatibility, but compatibility has been defined in terms of redevelopment and future development, but it's not compatible now because there's a noise issue. And so it's a fair argument. But as we noted, that we don't have authority over existing land uses and airport operations. So we're somewhat constrained by state statute. And then, there are a number of people who are like, what the heck, who is PCTPA, and, who's the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, and you've all heard that, in other venues.
yeah.
And when you have county in the title, it's confusing because everybody thinks that we report to the Board of Supervisors and we're part of the county. And so you have to go through that explanation. And for many people, they just don't get it. They think of terms of cities, counties, and state government, federal government, and not a number of special district type or joint power agency type creations. And then, lastly, people said, I've received this notice, how does this affect me? And of course, you can point people to the map, and then once they get, what it's about, then they appear to understand it better. With that, if you go to our website, and if you receive the notice, I've encouraged everybody to do this on the website. There's a blue box that says if you received a notice, click on this box, and when you click on this box, you have two choices, Auburn Airport or Lincoln Airport. And then for Auburn Airport, you can go and you can look at the map, and you can look at the current compatibility zones, and then you can overlay what the future compatibility zones are. And then at the bottom of that, there's what the various cases are with respect to if your compatibility zone has changed, what that means to you as a property owner. And then, of course, people have the ability to submit comments via email, and there have been several people who have done that. So timeline here, we started this thing, the board actually, approved, Mead and Hunt's contract back last June, and, we've had a number of project development teams, through the fall and early spring here. We work closely with the staff of your jurisdictions because we've had housing element, safety element reviews that overlapped, which are, play an important role in the implementation of this plan. And so we have today's a public workshop, which is kind of a kickoff for the whole public review period. We'll hold virtual workshops in July, and as I indicated, we hope to be back before the board here in September, recommending adoption of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, as well as adoption of the environmental documents. And then late fall, and maybe even early spring, there'll be subsequent actions with respect to the fee structure, the general plan consistency determinations, and various other technical project closeout type of activities. And I just briefly wanted to talk about the fee structure because it's been mentioned a couple of times. So for a long time, up till 2014, we collected a $35 fee to do reviews. And in 2014, we updated the fee structure. And so the fee structure at that point in time covered, and that's in place now, probably covers about 50% of staff time. And so what we will come back for your consideration will be whether or not you want to more fully recover the costs of staff time. And so in that instance, it will be pretty apparent that the fees will increase. And so that will be something that you will need to weigh as part of policy deliberation later this fall. As part of that fee collection process, we're also proposing to streamline it because, these applications come in, sometimes in bunches, and sometimes there's long periods of like no applications, because it's subject to development, applications and where things are in the pipeline with respect to the cities and the counties. And so what we have worked with the jurisdictions is the ability for them to collect the fees. And then if they collect the fees, as they collect fees on all sorts of things when someone files an application, then they would periodically then, send that money over to PCTPA electronically, into our ALUC, checking account. And so, rather than us just, what I have found over the course of 6 years is I've become, in many instances, a fee collector. So because the application is submitted to the county or to the city, and then it's bumped over to us, and I go, okay, well, where's the fee? And they go, oh, okay, well, we'll need to get the fee. And then, of course, the applicant, he wants to move along, or she wants to move along, right? There's a process there. And we're supposed to complete our reviews in 14 days. And I don't have the fee, so the application isn't complete. So then I have to kind of get on the phone and become kind of a fee collector. And, after a while, I thought that, in this age, with all the technology we have, there's got to be a better way to be able to collect the fee and transmit the fee to us. And so we're working on that, and hopefully that will be put in place.
So I see the shifting of responsibility for fee collection going on here.
Yeah, that's been noted by the staffs, but generally they've been quite good about that. There's been a lot of humor associated with it, but generally they've been positive in that regard. And the county staff have actually been quite helpful in that regard. Not to say that the cities haven't, but the bigger, most of the fee collection occurs with the county. So, wrap up. We're recommending you authorize the executive director to release, the airport land use compatibility plan and the associated draft environmental documents for a 30-day public review period, which starts tomorrow and goes to July 26th. And with that, thank you. I'd be glad to take any questions from the board. And if there are no questions, I would recommend that you take public input, first from those that are here within the audience, and then from there, those who are virtually online.
All right. Thank you both. Much appreciated. Mr. Chair? Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Miranda and David, for your presentation. It's very easy to follow. So now we're going to give it out to the public for comment. How do you go about? Do you send out more notices, or how's that going to be?
Well, the notice that we sent out was kind of encompassing in that it advertised this workshop, it advertised the 30-day public review period, and it advertised the 2 virtual workshops. And because that's a lot to crowd into a public notice, we refer everybody to one web link, and that's the ALUCP page. And so the notice says, the document will be available tomorrow,
Okay.
For review. So anybody that gets that notice, if they look at, the web link and go to the web link, everything that they need to find in terms of the next workshops as well as the plan availability will be there on that site.
So if someone calls me and wants to know what's going on, I can refer them to the web link.
To them, or if you want, you can have them just, refer them to me.
Oh, I'll come call you.
Yeah.
No problem.
I've spoken to a number of individuals, and so it's part of public responsibilities.
He's got lots of time. He's not collecting fees anymore. So.
Well, I don't know about lots of time, but you can refer them to me.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I do. First of all, you mentioned that a neg deck would be issued for Auburn. Is that contingent upon the infill being included? Because of the expansion of the runway, you're going to impact the additional zones. So with that impact, you're going to, of course, have to offset those impacts. So it is therefore contingent upon inclusion of that infill, correct?
Good question. The initial study evaluates the impact to Zone B1 and those 3 commercial properties that could allow for multifamily residential development. The analysis, if we were just to include or just focus on those potential impacts of up to 47 dwelling units alone, the conclusion would be still that Placer County can still achieve its regional housing needs allocation requirement, and that yes, there would be potential displacement on those sites, but the housing element does not include those sites in their inventory. And for those reasons, there would be still a less than significant impact. But if we add in the proposal for the infill green zones, it minimizes that impact or less than significant determination even more.
Okay, so great, I appreciate that because I wasn't clear. So that certainly makes it a little easier. And that goes to my next area of question and maybe a little concern is, you mentioned compatibility a lot. And we speak to the concerns you receive from individuals today, which we had 3 great bullet points to start our discussion today that we have no control over.
Right.
And we can't really address some of those. But we can when we approve or when we move forward with this plan, what happens moving forward. And so compatibility-wise, of as much as 30 units per acre in such close proximity to an expanded runway, I'm a little concerned about relative to that being infill. Because again, 30 units per, and I understand that's not set, but that's a potential for 30 units per. So if you have something to add on that and you want to jump in on that, please do.
Well, I just want to clarify, so in the infill area, the green means go infill area. That special condition exception would allow up to 20 dwelling units per acre. County's housing element looks up to 30 dwelling units per acre. And up to the 20 dwelling units per acre, and we didn't really get into detail here, there's a number of criteria for that particular project, a 20-unit multifamily unit that would need to address in terms of safety issues. So there's construction sort of issues, or recommendations associated with any project that would go in that area to make it more compatible with respect to noise and safety. Now, the county staff asked us to go above 20 because their housing element says 30. And I said, we went back and forth and we said, ultimately, we can consider a proposal for 30, up to 30 units, but that proposal would need to be vetted by you all. So, as the executive director for a major project review, if a project came in at 19 dwelling units, we would review that project. And because the way the policy works in the plan right now, you've delegated that authority to the executive director. But anything that came above 20, we would have to come before this board. And so we would, bring the applicant's recommendation. If the county was supporting it, we bring, the county recommendations as to why 30 units on that particular parcel, was warranted. And of course, we would look at it and we would give you, our recommendation. And, there'd be public hearing, and you would take that input and you would have to make that decision pretty much on a case-by-case basis, within that infill area, special area. And so that's kind of how we were proposing it, because could not just on the face of it make an argument to go above 20 based on safety and noise issues.
And David, with the green means go and that entire initiative, of course, we want to gain the greatest densities we can.
Right.
We also want the transit solutions. I don't believe people are going to be flying out of there because that's not a real easy and low-cost means for getting places out of the Auburn area. But that leads to another question I have, but I'll get there in just a second. But you brought up the 30 units, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Right.
And I
Okay.
did hear you.
Right.
I fortunately had the benefit of serving as a planning commissioner previously, so I get how that process
Okay.
works. But I also know how it works within the municipalities and the county when they say, well, we'd like the 30, so guess what's going to come forward are projects that obtain and request that. So there's a potential for that to come forward. And compatibility-wise, when we talk a lot about compatibility, I do get a little concerned in a green zone that's at the end of a runway that's being expanded, the compatibility of that. So I just wanted to mention it, that, you know, for me, that's an area, and I know you've got something on it. The other piece is what, and this is, Kathleen, I think your area of expertise, transit solutions in that area. What do we have available?
Sure. David also used to be our transit planner, so he can add to this.
I'm
if
sorry, David,
necessary.
I shouldn't leave you out of that.
No, all good. I like a little guest spot on David's item. So currently, Placer County Transit does serve the Highway 49 corridor, and part of the Placer County Government Center specific plan includes transit improvements to help that. Additionally, PCTPA staff is leading a reinventing transit effort with our operators across the county. So as the green means go zones come online, the development starts to take place and get approved up at Placer County Government Center, it would certainly be something that we would look to support those denser uses up Highway 49.
Okay, so there would be, though, an expansion of current routes, because I don't think, we don't have a current route through the airport area, do we?
We did at one point in time. There was, as part of an unmet transit needs hearing several years ago, where there was not an unmet transit needs finding. It was a voluntary agreement between Placer County Transit and the City of Auburn to operate a bus service up Loxley Lane because of the food closet that was there. But the food closet has since moved, and so that service has changed through that area.
So that route is no longer currently active?
I don't believe
The airport area, the closer to the airport, is not currently being served by transit. However, that area of Highway 49, including some of the commercial uses and the government center, are served.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. So I wanted to turn it back to you, because you're our expert there.
Great, thank you. I wanted to respond to your question of the appropriateness of having multifamily off the ends of the runway within the infill green zone. So when this question or request came in from Placer County, we took a very close look at the risk level and potential noise impacts off the west end of the airport. And we looked to the guidance provided by Caltrans Division of Aeronautics in their statewide guidebook, or what we call the handbook, Airport Land Use Planning Handbook. And the proposed infill green zones are outside of the high-risk zones identified by Caltrans Division of Aeronautics. So it's still within an airport influence area, which means that there is still some potential for risk, but it's much lower than off the ends of the runway within the runway protection zones and what we would call zones B1. In terms of noise impacts, we looked at the airport's noise contours from the 2007 master plan, which has a 20-year time horizon, and the infill green zones are outside of the high impact zones of 60 CNEL, which is the community noise equivalent level. It's a policy metric that's used for determining whether or not residential uses are appropriate. The main concern is with overflight. So overflight is very subjective. One person may be very annoyed by an aircraft flying overhead, where the other ones are pointing, hey, look at that airplane, and calls out the type of jet or helicopter.
That would be me.
And so we also consider the overflight potential impacts because of the fly-friendly corridor that goes to the west. So we really try to keep any of the infill green zones outside of those higher impact zones and settled on these locations that's included in the compatibility plan. Multifamily residential is less susceptible to noise annoyance from aircraft overflights versus something less dense like rural residential uses, single family uses, et cetera.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Great. Sandy, I see your hand raised. Why don't you go ahead? There you go.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. So my question is pretty basic. You indicated that the extension is not for landing, only departures. is that to minimize the effect of the noise and or safety?
This is Miranda. Good question. The proposal is to allow for additional takeoff run for aircraft departing to the west. There would be a nominal difference in the aircraft altitude over the developed areas. In terms of looking at that CNEL contour, the metric that's used for policy, I think it would be a very discrete, negligible difference in the actual noise contours. It's more just to provide some additional runway length to allow the aircraft to safely take off to the west or to the east. But the principal direction of flight is takeoffs to the west.
Okay, thank you. The other question just involves the special exception areas. I thought Rock Creek School was part of that. Is that not a special exception area?
Well, off the top of my head, I'd have to go back and check. So we will take a look at that.
Okay, you can just get back to me. And then finally, I do understand that this board has it's out of the purview of this board in terms of the noise. But are there any suggestions to minimize the noise to address some of the concerns of the individuals who are impacted?
Yeah, earplugs.
Well, so the city, there's a brochure on the city's website that shows or identifies routes to take, flight patterns to take in terms of trying to not fly over particular residential areas. I think probably, and I've talked with your fire chief, Dave Spencer, about this a little bit. I think probably just there needs to be a little bit more communication, with the community with respect to how the airport operates, how the community has the ability to report concerns. On your website, you have a form that a community member can fill out and submit with respect to a noise complaint or a safety complaint. And, the city then responds back to that individual. But in this day and age, there are a lot of people that just want to just talk with somebody versus necessarily going through a process of filling out a form and then waiting maybe 24 hours or 72 hours before somebody responds back. So probably looking at the avenue of communication. And, the city does a great job working with its pilots association and communicating, the concerns with respect to noise issues and proper flight, procedures and patterns. But I think probably there needs to be maybe a little bit more community outreach.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I was looking for an easy fix, like some sort of highway sound barrier we can buy together. But
yeah.
No, I understand that. Thank you very much. That concludes my questions.
Okay.
All right. I see a raised hand, but I can't tell whether that's a member of the commission or not. I don't think so.
No, it's a member of the public.
Okay. One last round. Anyone from the commission? Mr. Holmes?
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the infill zones, if a developer came to Placer County and wanted to put in a 30-unit per acre parcel on one of those infill zones, and the county proceeded with that, that would come to the Airport Land Use Commission for agreement. And if the Airport Land Use Commission denied it, the county would still have the ability to find overriding considerations to allow that use.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Just want to make sure. I don't want to see that happen because I would like to be friends with my friends in Auburn, the city of Auburn. But I just wanted to point that out, that there is overriding considerations that the Board of Supervisors can ultimately make if that
As well as the two cities.
Yeah.
You know, they have that ability too. But, you know, Director Holmes, I'd like to, so as part of that process, the county, and I think the cities hold like pre-development meetings. And so I would be invited to that meeting because it would be, you know, in the airport influence area, and I would be able to communicate. So you have an instance here where you're going to need to seek a special, you know,
Yeah.
conditions exception. And you may recall last May, we had a hearing here on special conditions exception with respect to the Community Resource Recovery Facility. And so before that particular application went too far within the county planning process, and where before the applicant spent a lot of money, you know, going through that entitlement process, it was recommended that it come before this commission for a determination. And ultimately, that application was withdrawn, you know, from the county entitlement process.
Right.
So hopefully, you know, we would be able to address a potential consistency, inconsistency early in the process, and then ultimately it would be up to the applicant and, you know, the jurisdiction to decide whether to move forward.
So you would be in those meetings because apparently you don't have enough to do.
Yeah.
He's not collecting fees anymore, so
that's
he's,
right.
you know.
Let David do it.
So again, keep in mind, the county would have the right to override, but that liability is going to shift to the county when they
Correct.
do so. And while I don't know, I haven't walked the ground that we're talking about here, but if you go 30 to the acre, I think you got to go 3 stories as well. So now you've got a height issue coming up. So
And those are all built into the specific criteria that'll be shown in the plan, and so those would all need to be addressed. And of course, if someone felt otherwise, they would need to seek as part of their exception, you know, and justify.
Right. All right. If there's nothing further up, I do have a raised hand from the commission.
I think.
Yeah, Dan Wilkins.
Yeah, go ahead,
Thanks,
Dan.
Paul. Thank you. Just a question on the liability topic. So my understanding is typically a government agency, just by virtue of approving something, so in this case, if a county were to take an action to override an inconsistency finding by the Airport Land Use Commission, and then approve a development in a air flight safety zone. My understanding is that government agencies don't typically accrue liability by virtue of approving something. So what I'm curious about, and it's probably, I'm not sure who the question is for, but what liability is it that really would exist for the government agency, and let's say it's Placer County approving something in an overflight zone that's deemed inconsistent with the airport land use plan? What is that liability really? So anyway, that's my question.
I think that's an excellent question for our legal counsel. I only spent 18 months in law school, so I think it would be not something that I would get into.
Deanne Gillick, our legal counsel, is online if you'd like to.
Oh, okay. Deanne?
Hi, everyone. I'm here remotely listening in, and that is a great question. And sitting here right now, I don't know if I have a good answer to you, because you are right. The public agencies are immune for discretionary approvals. There are situations where you still have to be reasonable in implementing your plans, and you can have liability if a public agency's implementation of plans are not reasonable. So just sitting, without having, thought about this previously, that's one area that, perhaps that's where the statute shifts that liability and provides that background. So I think that, it's a good question, and let's look at that. And let's kind of get back to the commission so we understand now and for future decisions when we're acting as the Airport Land Use Commission, what that actually means.
Hello, commissioners. This is Ken Brody with Mead and Hunt.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on maybe answer a little bit of that question?
Yeah, please do, Ken.
Someone who does airports more than I
Yes.
do.
I can at least speak with respect to what's in the ALUC statutes. And the way it's worded is it says that if an agency that is not the owner of an airport overrides the ALUC, then the agency that owns the airport would not be liable if anything should happen. So that's the first thing, because in this situation, two of the airports are city-owned, so if the city were to override the ALUC, the liability wouldn't change any. The other aspect of the statute is it does not say who would become liable. And to the best of my knowledge, in the over 50 years that ALUCs have existed, that has never gone to any kind of court or any kind of state attorney general opinion. So it basically just says who isn't liable if a agency not owning the airport were to override. But that's as far as the ALUC statutes go.
So on that, I'm glad that, since I'm not familiar with what liability might be, that there, isn't any case law. But on the first issue with city liability, as many of you know on public agencies, one of the ways that public agencies may be liable is dangerous condition of public property. So the manner in which the public agency owns and maintains its airport. So that does shift and shed light on the owner's potential liability or responsibility as owning that public property. So that is one statutory shift that fits in the statutes that we are familiar with as public agencies. So that helpful comment on that.
Yeah, certainly, and additionally, each of the airports, because they accept federal funds, has obligations to the FAA that not specifically having to do with liability, still speak to that issue in some manner.
So if I may just ask a follow-up. So the scenario, and I'm just trying to understand what this liability topic really means. And so the scenario I think of is, okay, let's say the city of Auburn owns the airport. There's development in unincorporated Placer County. Unincorporated Placer County makes findings to override a airport land use compatibility conflict with a development, and they make findings for valid reasons. Housing's needed. There's a housing project that's beneficial to the region, as an example. And then an airplane crashes into the building at some point in the future, and then folks are looking for who to blame other than the pilot, I guess. And then they try to go back and say that the county should have never approved that project, and because the county approved a project in the flight safety zone, therefore the county should pay some money. I think what I just heard articulated is that if the county made that overriding consideration, what it would do is it would make the city, as the owner of the airport, less liable, but it's questionable as to whether it actually makes the county more liable, because the county is acting in good faith, making a discretionary decision for which it has immunity, and it sounds like it's a very kind of esoteric and maybe a somewhat theoretical topic that hasn't been litigated yet, and so maybe this is just a point of curiosity for me, but as it relates to what this really means to do an override. So I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but I'm curious at the end if that line of logic I just went through, is that the typical line of logic we might run across in some kind of a very worst case scenario?
Yeah, that was well summarized and well stated as far as the distinction between the city public agency and with Ken Brody's knowledge, my lack of knowledge, and Ken being more familiar, saying there just isn't guidance on this in case law interpretation. As I said, maybe you can analyze it to the plans not being implemented and reasonableness, but I don't necessarily see that that either. So I think that that's a great summary, that it's an unknown, and would be a stretch of liability based upon those legal principles that we are familiar with.
Thank you.
And from a planning perspective, I agree as well.
Thank you.
If I may suggest, Chair Joyner, that this will be a topic that we could probably spend quite a bit of time, particularly over coffee. But I think probably it might be something that we talk and then get back to the board.
I agree.
In some sort of communication from the executive director before
I agree, but
September.
But that was actually a useful conversation for me as well, fleshing some of that out. So I do appreciate the question and the exploration of the question.
So we'll follow up.
All right, thank you. Any other members of the commission with a question before I open it up to the public? Seeing none? Any member of the public in the House that wishes to speak, please approach the podium.
My name's Stephen Stern, live in Auburn. I take full responsibility for buying my home 3 years ago. The realtor, when I asked about the airplanes flying overhead, the moment we drove the 140 miles each way to look at the house, said, "Oh, that's very unusual. I'm a pilot, that's rare." Well, we bought the house, lived there 3 years. I've called the FAA many times. I've called Dave at the city fire department, a wonderful man. Used to talk to Walt at the airport, a great guy. I had at least 50 videos on my phone of airplanes that I could spit at, flying over my property in my head. And I got a new phone, so I got rid of a lot of them. But I have some videos that are unreal, even of jets flying. It is nuts. It's all day long. I spend a lot of time outside. I'm retired. I've worked hard my whole life. We pay a lot in taxes to live here. This is crazy. It is so unsafe. And it's driving me crazy. I've worked my whole life to come here for this. And when they come in, I have noticed that several of them are cutting the engines, so it's very quiet. Even though they're low, they're quiet. But then there are others that are just, you got to be kidding. And in the several of the videos, you hear my swear words, I apologize, because I can't believe that someone's doing that. It is so unsafe. And it's gotten worse. When they land, they go right over our house. And since Dave's been there, and I've complained many times, I've called him 20 times already, and I do have a life, it's just, it's unreal. And then when they take off, flying over my house, 20 times, what are you doing? Make the world a better place. Why are you doing that? All day long. And, I understand, I'm a retired small businessman. I realize commerce and maybe they're schools and taking people on joyrides, but do you have to do that all day over my house? Anyway, we love Auburn, but the airport noise is crazy. We've just added $50,000-$60,000 worth of windows, double pane windows to our fairly new house already. And, my wife and I, we say incoming because it's just unreal. And thank you for your time. Sorry if I rambled, but I don't know what else to do here.
Understood. Thank you, David. Anyone else? Yes.
Chair Joyner, this is Aaron Hoyt here. I'm also monitoring the 3-minute time limit per speaker, and maybe after everyone within the board chambers has spoken, we'll move to those who have their hands raised in the virtual audience.
Yep.
Good morning. I'm Alex Fish with the Placer County Planning Services Division, and just wanted to take this opportunity to briefly describe the county staff's participation in the Compatibility Plan Project Development Team. And also to thank David for his assistance and collaboration with this project. Also to thank Miranda as well as Ken Brody for their expert guidance throughout this process. So through our collaborative efforts, the county staff does believe that this team has achieved a comprehensive update that balances the needs for continued protection of the Lincoln and Auburn airports and the expansion of services at those airports with the needs of the county programs such as the Placer County Conservation Plan, which encompasses the area surrounding the Lincoln Airport, obviously, and the continued enhancement of housing, shopping, medical services in North Auburn. The county team included myself as well as other experts within the Community Development Resources Agency to provide guidance for specific technical issues. Those persons include Shauna Purvines. She's our Deputy Agency Director and oversees the housing team. Also had Senior Planner Patrick Dobbs, who assists Shauna on the housing programs and has assisted her with the housing element update as well as some ongoing zoning text amendments that are complementary to that effort. Angel Green, who assisted on matters pertaining to an update to the safety element, which you all heard at a meeting recently. And then Greg McKenzie, who is the program administrator of the Placer County Conservation Plan. You heard quite a bit about that today. So I'm pleased to share with the Commission that with the assistance of David, Miranda, and Ken, we were able to collaboratively resolve all areas of potential conflict. And in my opinion, the 2021 update balances protection of airspace and airport land use for the City of Lincoln and the City of Auburn with respective compatibility needs for land uses within unincorporated Placer County. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Anyone else in the chambers wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go to those calling in.
Okay, Chair Joyner, the first person I'm going to unmute is Doug Marquand.
All right.
Doug, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Doug Marquand. Can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Thank you for your time and thank you for allowing the public to speak on this important matter. I've been a resident of Auburn for about 26 years in the same home. And when we moved in, there really wasn't, I mean, you could spend your time outside and enjoy the outdoors and not be interrupted by airplanes. But now that has changed recently. And it's just like the earlier gentleman stated, it's very significant. It does have an impact on your ability to go outside. When I was doing work from home and doing Zoom calls, I couldn't do Zoom meetings out on my backyard because it was too noisy. I know I was talking, as a matter of fact, I was talking to Robert Zukash or something from the fire department about a complaint in my front yard with my neighbor. And we had to stop conversing. It was probably a 30-minute call and we had to stop talking and wait for the plane to go by 6 times perhaps. And I see, because you can go to software and get information on flights and planes, and it appears a lot of it is regarding the flight schools. And there's about 3 main schools. They have about 20 aircraft according to their websites. And when they're doing their touch and goes or just flying around, there'll be about 20 times an hour that they just fly consistently around. And their altitude is right at the FAA requirements of about 500 feet above ground level, which is about 1,700 feet. Well, if they want to be good neighbors, if they're going to go around and around and around, maybe they could go up a few hundred feet, maybe 2,200. I don't know. I don't know what that impact is on the plane to fly higher, but maybe that's an option to reduce some of the noise. I know that they like to see what's going on in people's backyards because it's quite apparent that they do like to do that, especially when we're in our hot tub. They seem to, I don't know, maybe they go a little lower. And that's nothing exciting to see, let me tell you. Also, I'm curious about the decibel levels because according to, I believe, the ALUCP, if I read it right, they recommend to have decibel levels around 60 decibels, no more than 65 to the ground level, and 45 decibels inside the house. And it is much higher than that. The decibel levels are much higher. If you can speak to your neighbor or your family member in your backyard when a plane's going by, that doesn't bother me. And for the most part, the private singleton airplanes, even the Lear jets and things of that nature, they go by and it's pretty quiet. They'll be respectful. They'll be good neighbors. But I hate to pick on the flight schools, but they're the ones that are going around and around and around and around and around repeatedly. And I mean, if they need to have time in flight, go somewhere else. I mean, go enjoy the canyons. Also, they're going inside of C2 zone. They're supposed to be going around, I believe, in zone C1, but they're consistently going outside of C1, which is into C2. C1 is kind of along Bell Road, or newer Bell Road. And so they kind of go right above Bell Road would be the farthest they would go, but it's not that case. They're taking it really wide, and that's increasing the impact on your neighborhoods.
Chair Joyner, we've hit our 3-minute mark.
Okay, well, thank you. I do appreciate your time, and good luck with this, because I know it's a very challenging issue that you have to contend with the noise.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. So I do want to reiterate that with respect to noise, this body has no authority to address that at all. We're happy to listen to your comments and even pass them on, but there is no action that we could take that would improve that. So if we've got anyone else?
We have about 6 more hands raised. So I'm going to unmute Mary Posh. Go ahead and unmute your device. And my apologies for any incorrect pronunciations of last names.
Nope, thank you. That's better than most interpretations. Appreciate the opportunity to address this group. Understand that this board has some limited purview. At the same time, you are in the process of approving an update to the plan. And I want to draw this group's attention to some of the commitments that were outlined in the 2014 plan related to the Lincoln Regional Airport that have not been upheld. This group is intended to look out for both, obviously, the broader interests of the citizens of Placer County. I would hope as part of that, it also reflects the rights of private landowners. In the 2014 plan, there were, when there was take involved in the limits of land use associated with expansion of areas of the Lincoln Airport, namely the runway protection zone. There was identification that there would be future navigation easements put in place. My family has one of those parcels that is directly affected by that and has had no contact by the airport or others. So moving forward with yet another plan, and this is partially to bring into attention to other landowners in the area that may be affected by this 2021 plan, that the commitments that were laid out in the project description and in the plan have not been met. And this board does have discretion in not necessarily approving or moving forward the 2021 plan. That is under your discretion. So appreciate the opportunity to address this board and hope that you will take that into consideration in your vote to ultimately to approve the 2021 plan.
All right, thank you, Mary. Mary, will you do me a favor? Separate and aside from this board, would you reach out to me at the City of Lincoln and maybe we can communicate about what you feel was not followed up on by the city, and I can ferret that out and see if there's anything we can do there.
That would be greatly appreciated, Paul.
You bet. Happy to do it. Who do we have next?
All right, the next individual I'm going to unmute is Joe M. Joe, go ahead and unmute your device.
Yes, very good. Thank you. I have been living in Auburn since 1994 and at Luther Road and Highway 49 since 2006. And I know you say you don't have any authority about the noise level, but somebody should take authority on this because the noises drown out conversations. You can't speak on your cell phone. You got to turn up your TVs inside your house because these airplanes don't have mufflers. And there's got to be something that somebody can do. And what I've called the airport and the city and the county several times, and they just say, we'll look into it, and nobody does anything. I mean, it's a big problem. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Joe. Next.
Next, we have Heidi 1. Go ahead and unmute your device.
Yes, hi. Thank you for hearing my comments on this. I have been a resident of Christian Valley for 35 years. And when I moved here, it was very, very quiet. I realized the airport was there at the time, but it was extremely quiet here. And about 5 years later, I started hearing a lot of planes coming really, really low, right over the tops of the trees. And I started calling. Anyhow, to make a long story short, I have talked to the city, I have talked to the county. No one, and I understand that noise is not under the purview of this board. However, I really would ask that the people listening to these comments take into account that for the 30 years that I have been trying to get the noise issue addressed satisfactorily, it has not been addressed. And the people of Christian Valley have fallen through the cracks. And I'm sure that's true for many other people in the area, not just Christian Valley, but maybe Shadow Rock and the other areas around here too. I happen to be on the board of Christian Valley Community Service District. And right now we're addressing this as kind of an unofficial, we're mostly water and roads, but it's kind of an unofficial thing that we're addressing for the community, the noise issue from the planes. And I agree with the one of the other gentlemen that spoke previously mentioned the flight schools. Yes, they are a problem. Although I don't have time to always be going outside taking a video of the planes because I'm working, I'm doing other things, or I'm not here, but they are a problem. The touch and goes, they have no respect for their neighbors. They have no respect for our community and our right to peace and quiet, basically. And I want to say that I really appreciate the efforts of Dave Spencer with the city specifically, because I know he has tried to address the noise problem, but unfortunately it keeps falling through the cracks. And I really ask that this committee and the other people listening who are involved with the airport operations would look for an avenue to actually address the noise problem, so that there are some actual changes with how the airport operates, and so that it minimizes the noise on residents surrounding the airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Next.
Okay, our next individual I'm going to unmute is Christina Meyer. Christina, go ahead and unmute your device.
Hi, good morning. My name is Christina Meyer, and I own a home off of Lincolnshire Circle in Lincoln. And this is not a noise question. I don't know if this is the correct forum. I jumped on a little late, but I was just curious, with the expansion of the Lincoln Airport, is this going to allow for military aircraft to come in and land and take off and do exercises like that? Out of curiosity, I was just wondering.
It should not, but Lincoln Airport is an emergency runway for Beale, so there is the potential of an emergency situation, whether we're making this change or not, for military aircraft to use that in an emergency. But other than that, no, it does not open. Perhaps an air show might have military aircraft coming in, but as a regular operational part of that, no.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all I had.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, the next individual to speak will be Steve Prosser. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And also for those of you who may have phoned in on a cell phone or landline, you can also press *9 if you wanted to speak.
Good morning, Chair Joyner and members of the Commission. This is Steve Prosser, Community Development Director for the City of Lincoln. I'll make this short. I just wanted to show my appreciation to agency staff for the level of regional cooperation that was brought forward to bring this plan to you, and the support of their consultants. The city staff is supportive of the update to the airport land use compatibility plan in order to bring our runway protection zone into compliance with FAA regulations, and look forward to seeing a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. You heard Heidi's concern over navigation easements there in Lincoln. You and I will be talking about that sometime when you've got a little less on your plate, but sometime soon. So if you could look into that, I'd appreciate it, and we'll sit down and talk.
Already began. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Next.
Okay, Jeff Spencer, go ahead and unmute yourself. We have two additional callers after this.
Good morning, Chairman Joyner and Commission members and staff. One request I immediately have is to suspend a 3-minute rule, because I think I have some input that may be valuable to all the listeners and public commenters. And so if I could ask for that, please.
I can give you a little bit extra time, but...
Good. That's fine. I won't take a long time.
Mr. Chair, Jeff is actually the manager of this airport for the Auburn Fire Department.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
No, actually, I'm Caltrans Division of Aeronautics.
I'm sorry.
And
well,
that's okay. I'm actually the person who is your contact at Caltrans in the Division of Aeronautics for this plan.
All right. You just bought yourself a little more time. Go ahead.
For the folks who are concerned about the noise, I'm going to give you 2 emails. The FAA has a noise ombudsman that can be emailed at 9-AWA- and all one word, noise ombudsman at FAA.gov. And there's also a voicemail you can leave. It's at area code 202-267-3521. They have some things on the FAA website, for the information they require. You can go ahead and look at noise complaints FAA, and it'll pull that up via Google. Another person at the state level is Philip Crimmins. He is our noise analyst at the Division of Aeronautics. So there's a couple of contacts for you guys to address that, because I agree, noise, especially as the airport has expanded and more use, we still want to be good neighbors. Going on now, I appreciate the Commission's consideration of an update to the ALUCP. Many of the ALUCPs in the state are very aged, and Placer County is to be commended for keeping up to date with their ALUCP and the airport's expansions. One note is on the wildlife policy. There are a lot of legislation and things that help to enhance habitat. For instance, one current bill, AB 614, is to help enhance the migrating bird habitats. However, in the bill, they don't consult with general aviation airports, only commercial airports. And so wildlife strikes, especially with general aviation aircraft, oftentimes end in an accident and perhaps even a fatality. So I appreciate that section. want to also point out the economic importance of the airport. You know, as we look forward to the future, there's unmanned aerial systems, there are air taxis, everything is starting to come into play. There's electric aircraft, especially with regional flights, making connections to other larger airports. These airports are going to be very important to the future and of economic development in your cities. One thing to bring up is the housing laws that are in play right now. Since the last update in 2014, the state has passed many housing laws, especially with auxiliary dwelling units, or what we call ADUs. The state has passed a law that these are ministerial approvals and have by right ability to build them and actually subdivide land. One thing the ALUC should consider is the cumulative effect in the lands surrounding an airport, because it could become a conflict with the intensity of the land uses. Discretionary approval should be maintained for looking at any of those developments in the airport influence area. And then finally, one last note is on the liability question that was raised. And I'd point you to the PUC section 21678. What it is pointing out is that if an airport is operated by someone other than the public agency and the public agency overrules, the airport operator is held to be not liable because of the public agency's ruling. The liability that is basically transferred is that in the case of an accident and a subsequent lawsuit, it is the public agency who is accepting that liability because of that overrule. I'm not a lawyer, but we've dealt with a lot with overrules, especially in these recent days with the conflict of the housing that I just brought up. A lot of pressure on airports. The whole purpose of the State Aeronautics Act is to preserve the aviation system in California, and encroachment is one of those things that puts pressure on airports and closes down airports, which we've seen a lot of in the Sacramento region. But as I mentioned a little bit ago, these are very important economic drivers and important to regional mobility that is not on the surface transportation system. And with that, I'd be welcome to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Jeff. We have anyone else?
We have two more. I'm going to go to Michael Garabedian. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mike Garabedian. I'd like to have my email added to the email list. I guess that would make me number 11,001 or something like that. I want to talk about safety culture, something that started growing on me when I was 10 years old. My uncle was a commercial airline pilot, and I brought an accident to him, and he told me that every accident is caused by human error, so each Thanksgiving I brought a new one to him, and each time he explained where the human error was. And so we are potentially dealing with human error here in this process. So I would appreciate some more definition of that in the documents if it's not already there. And the prime example I know of was the Dreamliner 747 lithium battery ion hearings that the NTSB had a hearing on, and they had a panel there on safety culture. So there were different safety cultures, including marine and landed industries, and that was a real eye-opener about the different safety cultures that different organizations have. So it is very much possible to delve into what safety culture issues are here and how the risk is being looked at in that context. So I think it would be good to know on another point about the closings of airports, what leads to their closing and what causes their closing. Have some idea about the history of that in this region and other areas. You know, at what point does a closure happen? What triggers that? What conditions bring it about? Here we have a county that is, Mr. Frisch certainly is part of that effort, as many of us are on one side or the other, rambunctious development. So the impact of that on the airports in this case is a major issue. I hope that would be part of this update, and look forward to being more involved in it. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Garabedian.
And our last speaker who is calling in by phone, please go ahead and unmute your phone and speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. This is CJ McMurray, and I'm a homeowner in the Sullivan Ranch area. And I've been listening to the meeting as well as the people that have spoken. What I am concerned about, or I have a couple questions. In the 2014 plan, it does address the flight elevation, it addresses noise, the good neighbor policy. So I understand that you are not the people that want to listen to the complaints or can do anything about the complaints regarding the noise. I listened to Jeff speak about an email for the FAA, Jeff from Caltrans. Unfortunately, I did not get the whole email address, so I would like that.
We'll put it up on the
address.
website.
Okay. And then if you could please put the city and county people, their addresses, email addresses, or phone numbers up on your website regarding noise complaints, I would really appreciate
You bet. We can do that.
as well. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, CJ.
That's it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Chair Joyner, there are no more hands raised.
All right. Well, I do apologize. We're running long here, well into Sparta's time, but we'll try to get the meeting moving forward. We are being asked now that we've held the public workshop and taken public comments to authorize the executive director to release the draft airport land use compatibility plan update and associated environmental documents for a 30-day public review.
How Shelp moves.
What was that?
How Shelp moves.
Okay.
Okay,
Second.
Broadway second.
I think Brian got the second in.
He didn't state his name.
Oh, he didn't state his name, you're right.
Doesn't follow
Just
the
gotta You're
rules.
right, by default, it goes to the one who stated the name, so Broadway
Doesn't
gets
follow
the
the
second.
rules.
Sully.
Amara.
Yes.
Baker.
Aye.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris. Holmes.
Yes.
Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner.
Yes.
Jones. Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. We move on to item H, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Fiscal Year 2021-22 Budget Adoption and Program Agreement Renewal. Kathleen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to keep it short today between our two headliner items this morning. So before you for consideration is the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency budget for next fiscal year. This item includes a number of attachments. The first is the proposed budget, which you will be considering this morning. So in terms of looking at revenue first, we're keeping the same revenue sources as in previous years. The local transportation fund, the first line item for revenue, includes an increase to 4.5% off the top for CTSA's services. In previous years, we've taken 4%. However, to accommodate both the lost in sales tax revenue as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and to set aside some funds for future transit planning efforts to take a look at some of the need for reinventing transit and updates to our plans in the future, staff is recommending an increase, and that increase was discussed with the operators in the jurisdictions who concur with this recommendation. In terms of changes to expenditures, overall, I'd summarize them that first, the two programs that this board voted to eliminate in previous meetings are now removed from the budget, and those revenue expenditures have been reallocated to the new Placer Rides program. This budget also includes, as I mentioned, some set aside for future short-range transit plan updates, which will likely occur beginning in fiscal year 2022-2023. So we'll be setting aside a little from each budget. Additionally, the programs for the South Placer Transit Information Center, commonly referred to as the call center, the Transit Ambassador Program, and the Mobility Training Program, all of which are administered by the City of Roseville. The total cost for these programs is updated to reflect actual costs to run the programs as opposed to an annual allocation, which previously CTSA kept a flat allocation regardless of expense, which created some budget problems that we've been solving this year. So in addition to consideration of the proposed budget, as I've just outlined, there is also four actions of authorize the executive director to negotiate and sign, 3 of which are memorandums of understanding with the City of Roseville regarding the 3 programs I've mentioned. The City of Roseville has operated these programs for a number of years, but these are updates to the agreements to reflect the new funding levels as well as different invoicing recommendations and future developments consistent with their contracts. And then additional is the master agreement with Seniors First to operate the new Placer Rides program, which this board has previously directed staff to initiate. All of these agreements are for 3 fiscal years with 2 option fiscal years. And while I'm here, I'll just note that in the information items for the board's consideration are updates to the Placer Rides programs, including some requests from board members regarding legal counsel review of applications, forms, and waivers. So those are detailed in your information items. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board?
No questions.
Looking out to the virtual board, seeing none. All right, are we able to take this? Oh, I should open it up to the public. I apologize. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Either in person or virtually?
Nobody's raised their hand virtually, Chair.
All right, can we take all of these items at once? All right, I will accept a motion on item H then.
Broadway second.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie?
Amara,
Yes.
Baker,
Aye.
Broadway? Yes.
Burris, Holmes,
Yes.
Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we move on to item I, the June 2021 polling results for a potential 2022 transportation sales tax measure. Mike?
Good morning. I'm jumping the gun here.
It's still morning, yeah.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for this long meeting today. We wanted to present to you the polling results for the June polling associated with our funding strategy and outreach program for a potential 2022 sales tax measure. I would point out that we will have a amended recommended action as part of the PowerPoint presentation at the end. And so that will come forward at the end of the presentation, which is basically a subset of the existing recommended action. So this morning, I wanted to let you know that we completed in the first part of June our polling of the county-wide electorate as part of our restart of the transportation sales tax measure outreach program. The board directed us to take another last look at beyond the South County District, to take a look at the entire county, including the Tahoe Basin. And so we directed our longstanding polling firm, FM3, to implement that program on a county-wide basis. And in their presentation, they'll certainly differentiate between county-wide and district polling results. So with that, and due to lack of time, I'll turn it over to Kurt Balow, who has a rather lengthy presentation to deliver to you this morning, and we'll try to get through it as quickly as we can.
All right. Welcome, Kurt. Thank you. Sorry to make you wait so long to step up and do your presentation.
No worries. Happy to be here, and this is my first in-person presentation in over a year and a half, so you feel honored. All right, well, I'm going to get to the slides here. Great. I will try to be concise here and maybe take questions at the end, unless there's a clarifying question about one of the data you're seeing on the slides.
Yep.
So a quick overview of the methodology, similar to what we've used in the past. We did interviews online, where we sent people an email, or we called them on the phone, and we're looking at voters likely to vote next November's election. And we did this countywide, as Mike noted here. So we did 600 interviews countywide. We did some additional oversample interviews in Auburn, Colfax, Loomis, and North Lake Tahoe. The margins of error are still notable in those areas there, particularly in Colfax. So big, take those with a grain of salt, but we included them in these results anyway. I think one of the key numbers here is the 4% margin of error for the countywide numbers. So the first couple sections of this presentation are sort of table setting. Where are voters' heads? If you're going to ask them to consider a potential revenue measure of next year, are they pessimistic, optimistic? How do they feel about traffic in general? And one of the classic questions to determine where people's heads are is the right direction, wrong track, the old 1920s Gallup question. We've been asking it. These are results going back to post-Measure M, essentially. And you see those blue bars, those who feel like the county's headed in the right direction, that have been going down since that 2017-2019 range. And I'll call them, for now I'm looking at them, brownish kind of bars, have gotten a little bit bigger, but not dramatic. It's still about half of voters feel like the county's headed in the right direction. It's not as optimistic as it was a few years ago, but it's not overwhelmingly pessimistic either. A couple of notes about who's a little more likely to be an optimist versus those who are a little more likely to be a pessimist. It doesn't mean that these groups are overwhelmingly in one of those categories. They're just a little more likely than the typical respondent to the survey. The optimists tended to be college-educated and men, a little bit younger, a little more Democrats, a little more independents. Those who are a little more likely to say wrong track, women without college degrees, Republicans without college degrees, older Republicans and younger women in general. That's just sort of a flavor of who's a little more optimistic about the county's direction, who's a little more concerned about its direction. So these next couple slides, I think, are very important for table setting and understanding the lens through which voters are considering a potential measure at this point in time. So we asked a variety of questions, a variety of potential problems facing the county, and asked respondents to say, well, is that an extremely serious problem, very serious, somewhat serious problem, or not too serious of a problem? We tend to focus on those intense reactions, those who think that something's an extremely or very serious problem. We summarize those on the right, but we're really looking at the darker shaded bars. And you'll see here that there was kind of a top tier of things. Wildfire, drought, housing costs. 2/3 or more of respondents to the survey said those are extremely or very serious problems in the county. This was not a surprise to us at all. If you look down that list, though, the item we have highlighted is traffic congestion on local freeways and highways. Half of the respondents to the survey said that's an extremely very serious problem. We're going to see that that is a big drop from where it had been a couple of years ago. So just eyeballing this here, fires, droughts, housing costs, top tier issues, traffic on freeways and highways, kind of in that middle grouping. Second slide in this particular series, you see a variety of items that were kind of 40% or fewer, felt like there was any sort of intense problems there. You see those dark blue bars getting a little bit bigger. I think the kind of important ones to look at here are the amount you pay in local taxes. So that's still something that 2 in 5 voters feel some level of concern about. Interestingly enough, the condition of local roads, potholes, depending upon how we phrased it, lower tier concern. Jobs and unemployment, right at the bottom of the list. Not a lot of intense concern about that, broadly speaking, from a November 22 electorate. This is had somebody, and maybe one of you call this a spaghetti chart, which is kind of what it looks like right now, but trust me, it actually makes more sense a few slides in. Going back to October 2017, we've asked about a number of these potential problems facing the county. And if you notice, generally speaking, everything's kind of in the same, varies a few points here or there, but those concern levels have been relatively consistent. I'm going to highlight the ones that have changed. So right off the gate here, droughts, cost of housing, we're kind of flirting around in the upper half of concern levels, but just shot up from last summer to this summer in terms of now they're at the top 2 issues facing the county. If you look at concerns about the local economy, so we asked one pointedly about the coronavirus's impact on the local economy. Obviously, we didn't ask about that before. We slipped it in kind of at the last minute from that March 2020 survey. And then those concerns shot up as there was a lot of uncertainty last summer, but you're already starting to see those concern levels come down. It's still, in the top half of problems. Jobs and unemployment, very much a lower tier problem in the county. A few years back, has peaked up last summer, but it is also declining in concern. Now here's the one that is probably the most important and relevant for a potential sales tax measure is traffic congestion. If that is one of the big problems the measure is eyeing to address, how much of a problem do voters feel like it is? It had been, particularly on freeways and highways, the top or one of the top two issues, last several surveys, about 2/3 consistently saying that's an extremely or very serious problem here in the county. Drops down last summer and continues to drop actually right now. I know that we have data, and the agency has data that suggests that those traffic levels on the freeways have basically come back, but the perception is that that's not the case right now. The lived experience for a lot of these voters is the traffic congestion on the freeways and highways just isn't as serious of a problem. We asked a couple other questions in the survey about traffic congestion and economic anxiety. One of the ones we've asked, if you look at the bottom row of this slide here, it says prior surveys. Do you feel like traffic's gotten worse, gotten better, stayed about the same? And then we had to change that last summer because of the stay-at-home orders, so we tweaked the question a little bit. We adjusted it again this time to say, well, comparing over the last year and a half isn't as relevant. Let's try to think back to pre-pandemic. And what we have here is those brownish bars are the percentage of respondents who always said that traffic's getting worse. I'm feeling it. My lived experience is that it's worse. That was consistently in the 70%. So this is a consistent feeling. Like it's just getting worse. That started to dissipate last summer and has really fallen off this summer. Only 37% feel like it was worse now than it was pre-pandemic. Almost half, 46%, feel like it's about the same. So again, another indication that the perceptions about traffic are that they're just not at the same heights they were a few years back. So we added a question last summer and continue it this year. Well, things are jumbled. What about prospectively? When the economy fully recovers, and we're not specific about when that would be, but do you think traffic will be better or worse? Last year, about half said I think it'll be worse. Now that's bumped up to 62%. So now you're talking about traffic is not as much of a pressing issue now, but there's this feeling it is looming on the horizon. And when things sort of come back fully, many voters feel like it's going to continue that trend of getting worse. We broke this out by city. And again, the caveats with some of the sample sizes here, particularly Colfax, but just because of the smaller community. But those red highlighted numbers were ones where you saw an appreciative higher level of concern about traffic in the future. Lincoln, way up there, top that list. 84% feel like it's going to be worse. And when the economy fully recovers. Roseville, Auburn, and North Lake Tahoe actually are pretty high numbers as well. We did ask one additional question about economic anxiety. Do you feel like over the next year your personal household finances will be better or worse or stay about the same? Most voters feel like it's going to be about the same. There's not a lot of pessimism. What we were looking at here, we thought maybe they'd see a lot of people concerned about broader economic issues feel like it's going to be worse. And only 14% of voters thought that would be the case. So most voters feel like things will kind of be where they are now. And that was very consistent when we looked through that geographically. Solid majorities in every community feel like it's going to be about the same. The worst numbers were no higher than 15% anywhere. So I'll take a quick water break.
I would point out as Kirk is getting a drink of water that those one lens of that first part is that those are asked of the entire county, not just the district, which we'll get kind of to at the end of the presentation.
Yep. That's a great point. So unless I otherwise note or noted in the slides, these are all countywide responses right now. So views of local government. So this is a favorable, unfavorable scale we use. The darker blue bars are very favorable, lighter blue somewhat similar on the unfavorable side. The gray bars are some version of I've never heard of that, or I don't want to answer, or I've heard of them but I don't really have a feel. And so we tend to just look at the intensity numbers there. And for the Board of Supervisors, 41 favorable, 24 unfavorable. It's come down some from higher numbers a few year or so ago, but it's not dramatically out of the range of where things have been. The unfavorable number has picked up a little bit. That's now about a quarter of voters, but it's still not dramatically different. It is a plurality, have a positive opinion. Numbers were a little better about a year and a half ago. For the agency itself, the interesting trend here is that the agency have been engaged in a lot of community outreach over the course of the last few years, and you could see a pretty steady uptick in those favorable numbers. They had gone from 36 up to 47, and the unfavorable numbers had dropped down to 12, and now that's kind of reversed itself a little bit as the agency put a hold on those communications, but there's other priorities facing it. We'll go through a couple of the cities here. It's helpful just, this is the a measure that ultimately the agency itself here and some of these cities would be helping spend those dollars. How do you view them? Lincoln's government has had a little more volatility at the city level here. It was way up at 71% favorable in 2017, dipped quite a bit early 2020, but has rebounded in the last year or so and is now at 57% favorable. Rockland city government, these questions were just asked of voters in these cities. 69 to 12, very positive overall ratio, maybe a little less intensity in the past, but still pretty consistent. Roseville, very, very similar dynamic as Rockland, 70% favorable, only 14% unfavorable. Maybe the very favorable numbers are down a little bit, but still the overall impressions are quite positive. And Loomis, there's more volatility there. It's still pretty positive at 69 to 19. It's a smaller sample every time, so we expect more volatility. Colfax and Auburn, again, pretty solid. 3 out of 5 voters view those communities' governments favorably. All right, that's a lot of preamble, but at least gives you a sense of where people's heads are coming into this. Let's get to the tax measure itself. We presented a hypothetical 75-word ballot question to respond to the survey. They either read it or had it read to them on the phone. And we went over the different areas the money would be spent on, talked about the actual tax mechanism, the amount, how much it would generate, the fact that it has a 30-year sunset, and there were some accountability provisions. We did do one little variation in here, which was, as we're kind of coming out of this pandemic and the economy is starting to rev up again, to what extent is job creation going to be an important element of this, at least from the perception of voters? So we just moved that little phrase to create local jobs early in one version, late in the other version. Respondents got half and half. So there's no material difference, just a little reordering, and we'll talk about the distinction there or lack of distinction that we saw. So what were reactions to this? This is the countywide number, as Mike noted here. So when presented with this, would you vote yes or no? If they said yes or no, we pushed them a little bit, definitely or probable. If their initial instincts were to be undecided, pushed them a little bit. Are you leaning one way or another? And we ended up at 59% yes, 36% no, with somewhat similar levels of intensity at 29% definitely yes and 24% definitely no. So this is a very solid majority of November voters would say, yes, I would vote on this measure. It is short of the 2/3 vote threshold by a number of points here. So this is not unfamiliar territory for this agency. We break this out a little bit with that one little flip-flop there of where do we put to create jobs early or late in those 75 words. In aggregate, made no difference. Both versions had support from 59%. Both versions were opposed by basically the same amount. There was a little difference in the intensity. So when we had the create local jobs a little bit lower in the ordering there, we ended up with like a little more intensity there at 32% definitely. Yes, so a marginal difference there. These two slides are key to think about here. So the surveys we conducted from 2017 to last summer were all of the district, so the narrower region portion of the county. And these are the responses for the initial votes in those surveys we conducted. So we started off 75, 66, and then started a steady descent, essentially down to around 60% as of last summer. Countywide number, we're at 59%, which would represent even a further decline in support. It's not apples to apples because it's not the same geographic universe. If we just isolate the district boundaries in this survey, so we're just really focusing on the 3 major cities, support here is at 64%, which is much more comparable to where we were at the beginning of 2020 and a few points higher than last summer. So as a comparison point, this is marginally better than a year plus ago, not still at the heights that a measure was in 2019 and 2017. Breaking this out by city, there is a pretty clear cutoff here where there's 3 cities where support gets into the 60s, Lincoln, Rockland, and Roseville. Lincoln, remember, that was the numbers there were 84% of voters feel like the track's going to be worse when the economy fully recovers, so that's not at all surprising there. And support is sort of hovering around 50% plus or minus a few points every place else. For this first initial question, if you said you were going to vote yes, we asked you to explain why. What's your rationale for voting yes? And either they typed it in or they mentioned it to the telephone interviewer, and then we do our best to categorize those. And that's, as you might imagine, as much art as science. People can say multiple things. This could add up to more than 100%. But the main rationales were traffic reduction. The traffic's bad. I want to do something about it. Secondarily was something about improving the road quality. But there really wasn't much here on other topics. On the no side, same drill. If you said you were going to vote no, why? Tell us. Really about taxes. Some version of taxes are too high. And then secondary concern was the government mismanagement of funds. So as a part of trying to determine whether something was viable, that initial vote, that 75 words, that's the only thing you're guaranteed that everyone voting on a measure would see when they look at their ballot. That's the most important vote in the survey. But we also want to see what would happen if community dialogue, people saying this is a good idea, people saying this is a terrible idea. What happens there? Do opinions change? And we rotated those in this survey. So half of the respondents got arguments in favor of the measure and then heard the negatives, and the other half heard negatives and then the positives. So that lets us see ceiling and floor. The ceiling, countywide, again, these are all countywide numbers, unless I say otherwise, was 60%. So that went from 59%, putting our thumb on the scale one direction, all the way up to 60. Not that much of a change. When you put our thumb on the other side of the scale, just negatives, support dropped all the way to 46%, and actually there's a plurality who indicated they would vote no. So there's some volatility there, but it's more in one direction than the other. But if you blend those together, now everyone's heard both. You may have heard them in different order, but after a mixture of pros and cons, support dropped from 59 to 52. That is not entirely surprising. We've seen that in essentially every survey we've done. When there's really an even exchange there, support has gone down some. These are county-wide. But if we look at that final vote in our survey, after pros and cons, if you compare the countywide numbers to the 3 district cities, there is a appreciable difference there where support countywide ended at 52, amongst the district cities gets up to 58%. Still goes down from that 64 number, but goes down to a lower number there, and the intensity is a little bit stronger there as well. Again, multiple data points suggesting that the district-wide approach has more viability. A couple of the things here we'll go through. One is sometimes that support moves down a little bit, moves up, and maybe it's masking a lot of movement back and forth, maybe it's not. So we look at the vote consistency. If you're going to vote yes every single time in this survey or vote no every single time, you're probably going to do that when it if it was placed on the ballot right now. So the consistent yes voters were a little less than half, 46%. Consistent no voters are at 32%. So for a 2/3 measure, that's pretty close to that razor-thin margin. Looking a little bit at the demographics of who's in these categories, a reminder that being in one of these categories doesn't mean that all Democrats that consistently voted no, or all Republicans consistently voted, all Democrats consistently voted yes, or all Republicans consistently voted no. Just means that they were more likely than the average respondents, the average voters, to fall into these categories. So Democrats, voters of color, Latinos, Lincoln and Rockland residents, they were more likely than typical voters to consistently vote yes every time. On the other side, the no side, Republicans, District 5 and Auburn residents were more likely to be consistently no. In the swing category, these are voters who moved their position or were undecided throughout the whole survey. A lot of them were younger, lower levels of educational attainment there, independents and women, and some younger Republicans in that mix as well. 2 more sections. I'll get through these quickly. Spending priorities, so ways dollars can be spent. A couple notes on these. Again, I'm reporting it for the full sample here, the countywide numbers. But everything was a little bit less important than it had been the last time we asked these questions in March of 2020. So traffic concerns have gone down. We saw that earlier in the survey. When we compare how important the spending priorities are now compared to they were in March of 2020, they're down as well. Bears to reason, Gesundheit. Also, and we have a slide on this part a little bit later on, the items that were specifically about either 80, 65, or the interchange were different when you asked about them countywide versus you asked about them in the 3 district cities. So with that preamble, we have this long list of items here, ways the money could be spent, projects that could be built, how important are they to you? And once again, we focus on the intense reactions, whether something is extremely or very important to respond to the survey. All these items were seen as extremely or very important for at least 3 out of 5 respondents to the survey. And it's interesting, pardon me, a lot of these are not traffic congestion related directly. Some of them are, but there's a lot of safety items in here. Now, taking away the first item, which is about matching funds essentially, and dial-a-ride, which is the 4th item, bridge repair, safe routes to schools, making sure the roads are clear for emergency responders, wildlife, if there's a wildfire, making sure evacuation routes are clear. There's congestion elements of some of these, but a lot of them are kind of safety oriented. When we get to the second slide, so items that were in that 50-ish range of extremely or very important, more than half, but not a 2/3 or anything. Now you see a lot more of the congestion items. Talking about widening 65, framing it a few different ways. Again, talking about the 80-65 interchange, talking about broadly reducing traffic congestion, talking about hotspots. The intensity numbers were down a little bit from some of those items on the prior slide. This is the 3rd of 4 of these slides. This one is items that were only 40% felt any juice about. And these were kind of specific road, widening baseline road, Placer Parkway, Capitol Corridor. These items did not generate a lot of intensity. And then broadly speaking, I'll put this in the alternative transportation category. Bike lanes, bus, public transportation broadly, regional trail. Still have solid majorities who feel like any of these items are at least somewhat important, but there's not as many who feel particularly intensely about that. We also, in each community, we asked a question about road repairs. And so we only asked residents of Roseville, well, what about dedicating some of these funds to road repairs in Roseville? And we did that for each of these communities. There's a pretty big range about how strongly those resonate. Colfax numbers, big caveat there, but in Colfax and Lincoln, those seem to resonate with more intensity. More than 1/3 thought those were extremely important spending areas. Rockland, Roseville, other folks were like, yeah, sounds good, but they didn't have the same level of intensity. This was the slide I mentioned before. So the table on the left is basically the first slide in the spending priorities. These are all the things that got to at least 60% extremely or very important, countywide. If you narrow the focus geographically to just the 3 district cities, you have all those same items, but some of them are seen as more intensely important, and a few other items move into this tier. So if just looking at the very top one there, which is completing all phases of the interchange improvements to reduce traffic congestion and improve safety, that went from 64% countywide to 72% in the 3 district cities. So some of these projects just resonate more strongly there. Widening 65, that was in the 50s countywide, moves up into the 60s within these areas here. So there's clearly, if you look at these priorities countywide versus in the 3 cities in the district, those priorities, while similar, there's more of an emphasis on the traffic reduction items in 3 district cities. The last substantive section I have here is going through some pro and con arguments. So I'm going to skip through the language here real fast, but we went through a variety of rationales as to why this measure would be a good idea, a variety of rationales why it would be a terrible idea, and we asked respondents to react to those. So here, the scale we used was, after we presented each of these, well, is this a convincing reason to vote yes or a convincing reason to vote no? And so in this case, we're looking at the arguments in favor of a measure. So the dark blue bars are those who feel like it's a very convincing reason to vote yes, light blue, somewhat convincing. And there was a top argument, which was, it was kind of an omnibus argument about traffic is bad. Or at 90, at the time we did this, it was at 90% levels, which I think it's higher than that now.
105.
And it's just going to get worse as the population increases. That was the most compelling rationale. The bottom of the list, we talked about the local economic recovery and the jobs this would generate. We saw the jobs in the economy just wasn't a top concern right now. And then a variety of different rationales and arguments kind of in the middle. On the negative side, we went through, a lot of these are the same sort of criticisms that we've tested in the past, same sort of scale. And again, we have kind of a top one and a bottom one here. The top one is the gas tax. That's every time we've done this survey, that's been the number one criticism, is that shouldn't the gas tax be paying for things like this? We did work in an argument here at the bottom. Again, with COVID, we're trying different things because things have changed in some regard. A criticism that maybe this isn't necessary because people will be working remotely. Why do we need to worry about traffic congestion? Traffic won't be as bad. That seemed to fall upon deaf ears. So to wrap up here, in terms of the electoral context, half of your voters feel like traffic on freeways and highways is a pretty serious problem. It was about 2/3 a little over a year ago before the pandemic hit. So that's a very different point of view. But 62% feel like it's going to be worse in the future. So it's a sense of it's a problem, but a middle tier problem, but it will probably regain that footing as a top tier problem in the future, just not right now. And there's not a ton of economic anxiety out there. So it feels like right now, if you're asking someone to vote on a tax measure to address traffic congestion and it's not a top tier issue, that's going to have an impact on those support levels. So looking forward, is a measure viable? And the big charge we had now is looking at the countywide versus the district level here. And you'll see that countywide, we started at 59%. Best case scenario is just all the positives, only moves up to 60%, still pretty far short of 2/3. But when we looked at just in the district boundaries, we did get up to 64% in the initial vote. So there's clearly a difference in support there. So it feels like we are not asking voters who took the survey to consider a measure in the same context that they will be next year. Traffic will be worse next year unless something else happens. So, but right now, it's not a top tier issue. So it's a little hard to try to judge the viability for something next November, but we can still say with I think, a high degree of certainty that a measure is more viable in the 3-city district area versus the countywide. So with that, Mike, I think you had a...
Yeah, actually, before I wrap up with our recommendation, I'll ask Cherry Spriggs to come up with FSB core strategies for just a couple minutes and say a couple of comments.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. This, too, is my first time providing comment in in-person setting, so this is really wonderful and nice full circle. I like that. So, obviously, thank you so much for having us be here today. I really appreciate that. I am going to say that the funding strategy effort team, we do echo the staff recommendations before you today. Due to the request that you all received to examine countywide, it had been quite some time, at least over 5 years that I can recall. We did that and we looked at those numbers. And, truth be told, as I have seen this presentation now 4 different times and really took stock of those numbers, where we are in those outlying communities, so not the district, in the outlying communities is not too far from where we were, or it might be actually where we were a little bit less in Measure M with those Measure M results, quite frankly. I think, you did have to look at that to see if we were, going down the right track here. And, when you take into consideration those Measure M results and why we all looked at a district approach anyways, I do think these numbers today that Kurt presented for us show and reaffirm that approach, that is the most sound approach for our communities. So that, looking at that and seeing that, at 64% that we actually did come up from where we were last year in June is good to see. Additionally, just also these numbers reaffirm that public outreach. We've always stood before you and said, whenever we go, however we go, it's going to be a situation where there's going to need to be a lot of public outreach, and once the agency turns this over to a private campaign, that campaign is really going to go after every single vote, or is going to have to be successful. And I think these numbers too reaffirm how important the public outreach is. So thank you for always being so supportive of that. And with that, those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Jerry. And to wrap up here, just pointing out a couple things. One is the board did direct us to restart our outreach efforts in October of last year and approved approximately a $1.4 million outreach budget, if you will, over the next 2 fiscal years to take a look at reaching out to the public as Cherry outlined. And we began that effort with, a effort and moniker that traffic is back. We went out into the community and conducted 14 virtual public workshops all over the county, not just in the district, but over the entire county. We actually still have one left, one that was requested for Lincoln in the Sun City, Lincoln Hills area that we'll be having on the 29th. And we attached the results of the polling that was done within those meetings, and again, it reconfirmed our expenditure plan focused on improvements along Interstate 80 and Highway 65 and local roadway expansion. And it did include a focus also on alternative modes, transit and bicycle and trails. So we have been out in the community extensively over the past few months, and our recommendation today, based upon that outreach, based upon the polling that was conducted by FM3, is as stated in number 2 on the screen, is because of the polling resulted in favorability pointing again to a South County district at 64%. Our recommendation is that we not pursue the countywide effort any further. As you know, with Assembly Bill 1413, we have the choice of either the district or countywide. We can't really cherry pick each individual town or city outside of the district, so it's either district or countywide. And the polling very clearly indicates, as well as the outreach very clearly indicates, that the district approach focused on only the cities of Roseville, Rockland, and Lincoln would be the only thing that would be viable at this point. However, we do feel that we are not quite out of the throes of and effects of the pandemic as yet. We are not even close to being back to even partial employment in terms of in-office employment. And if indications are correct, it appears to be that a number of our private sector employers here in Placer and in the region will be coming back online or in person or partially in person around the September 15th timeline. We do not have any of our universities or local community colleges online. They will all be coming back online, with the last one, I think, coming back online around September 21st. So in addition to recommending the geography as the district, our recommendation is that we conduct an additional poll in October focused on the district to really see where we are at that point, because there will be a much different picture in terms of traffic. We're at 105% right now. We're going to be well above 105% of pre-pandemic levels this fall. And traffic really is the thing that generates the need for this and sentiment for this. And so a October timed district polling brought to you at your October meeting, we think would be the best way to measure where we're at with this. And then lastly, we would recommend that we continue on our approach for funding outreach through that October, kind of a cautiously proceeding ahead, or whatever you want to call it, yellow flag or yellow light or whatever, until October. But certainly we need to conduct that to be ready for October to let people know kind of what we're doing. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you would have, and recommend that you open this up for any public comment as well.
You said you had a modified recommendation?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's on the screen right now. So item 1 is to receive the presentation, which we just presented to you. Item 2 is that because the polling results reflect support for the 3 cities, that you direct staff to implement the educational outreach in only those 3 cities through October 2021, and then direct staff to do a poll on only the South County district of the 3 cities in October, and then bring that back to you in October.
All right.
So a modified recommendation, which is on the screen.
Got it. Thank you. Questions from the board? No questions? All right, that is a raised hand. All right. Go ahead.
Thanks, Paul.
You
Dan
bet.
Wilkins. Yeah, I'm supportive of the staff recommendation. I was one of the board members that was requesting that when we did this first round of polling, that we do it on a countywide basis. And I think for me, it confirmed what we were expecting, which was that the strongest support would be within the district boundary, and that there was likely going to be waning support for a countywide measure. I think it was useful to get that question answered definitively, at least for me, so that going forward, as this is being considered, there's not a lingering question of should we have considered a countywide measure. It appears to me that a countywide measure would be very unlikely to pass. It seems that a district measure has a tough road to hoe, but would have a better shot. So I'm supportive of the staff recommendation.
Got it. Thank you, Dan. And I apologize for having a hard time seeing you. For me, you're 5 inches across and 10 feet away. Very good. Any other members of the board? Seeing none, I'll open it up to the public. We have no public in-house. Anyone online?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's a member of the public who would like to speak.
All right.
Good late morning, members. I am Mike Garabedian with Placer County Tomorrow. So we've had 6 polls now, and you're planning on number 7. To our way of thinking, a real misuse of what the county is asking for state help. I think this came from a state implementation plan, a STIP grant, $1 million or $2 million grant from the State Transportation Commission, and this is your priority. This is what you want to do. Keep working on this project that the voters didn't pass. $1 million was spent to pass it back and didn't do the job, and now you're talking about doing it in the 3 cities. Well, who testified against that bill, AB 1413? Who testified against allowing it to be in the 3 cities? Well, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and myself. I was there testifying against it because the voters don't want this. They recognize that you're pushing something that is not our future. The arguments, you are not having sessions that are fair or balanced. People are not hearing both sides. The constant mentioning of doing something about congestion is a red herring. Nothing's going to relieve the congestion because of the tens of thousands of units that are being approved. you have to start figuring out something else to do. As long as you keep beating this dead horse, the voters will keep voting no, and you are not starting to look ahead to figure out what to really do about this transportation problem. I know what I'm saying is falling on deaf ears here, and I don't know frankly, what can be done about it. I worked very hard opposing Measure M, and if it gets back on the ballot, it will not just be opposing it and trying to bring some common sense that you just don't have and to solve our transportation problems. You have to take a new look at what's happening there, and are utterly not capable, not interested in doing that. Very minor other types of projects to address this problem. So another poll, it would be good to know what each poll costs. If you sort of divide the grant into the number of times we polled, maybe it's a couple $100,000 each poll. It would be good to know what each poll is. And what is this poll? It is a campaign type expense. It is trying to figure out a strategy to pass another Measure M, Measure M2. How each of you in good conscience can think this is a good use for your time, I can't question that. But in terms of questioning what is good for the voters or the people in the cities you represent.
Mr. Chair, 3 minutes has elapsed.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gary Bevian, if you could wrap it up.
So, yes. Anyway, thank you again. We'll see you again.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak?
There's no other request for public comment at this time.
All right, thank you. In that case, I am open to a motion.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out that this effort is not funded by a state STIP grant. This is funded by local transportation funds, a decision made by the board to spend local dollars on this. So,
all right. Thank you, Mike. Useful.
How does Shelton moves?
So we don't need an action, just give you direction. And
we would ask you to move the recommended action as presented on the screen.
So Bruce, you've moved the recommended action. Seeking a
Correct.
second. Mr. Holmes has the second. Sylvie?
Amara?
Yes.
Baker?
Aye.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris? Holmes?
Yes.
Howdeshelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Wilkins?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you all very much. We are bypassing the traffic congestion report presentation this time out. We move on to item J, the executive director's report. Kurt, thank you. Cherry, thanks so much.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'll keep this very brief, given the time that we have and overtime. One of the things I wanted to mention is that, well, a couple things. One is that we provided to you in your packet, we provided to you by email yesterday the PowerPoint presentations, so that we'll endeavor to do that on a regular basis to get you that by email. It was a request of a couple of our board members, and we'll continue to try to do that. If you have any other input into that or would like us to do things differently, please let us know. But we'll try to get you that in advance, especially as it relates to when we do this, continue to do some of this virtually. It's easier to see that on your computer screen.
It is.
So, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was related to meetings. As you may know, Governor Newsom rescinded Executive Order N-29-20 to allow the waiver of the Brown Act for virtual meetings. That will come to an end on September 30th. Therefore, if nothing happens in the legislature before September 30th, we will need to move back to full in-person board attendance of these meetings. There is a way to do this virtually, but it becomes somewhat problematic that wherever we have a virtual attendee, we would have to notice where that person is. That person would have to open up their home or their office to allow the public to attend in those places, as well as a potential for, if that wasn't done right, then we could be challenged on that. So there is a number of Assembly Bills 703, Lee, Assembly Bill 361 Rivas, and Assembly Bill 339 Rubio that are kind of stuck in the legislature right now. We're not sure if they're going to make it through or not, but some of those would allow more flexibility with virtual meetings, and we'll certainly keep you apprised of that and the progress of those to see if there's any way we can continue to do anything virtually. But as of now, it looks like returning back to full board attendance in person here at the Domes is likely to be required after that September 30th deadline. So.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
With that, again, kind of due to lack of time, I will conclude and answer any questions that you have, and I think we have one board member that has a
All right.
hand up.
Bruce, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Mike and staff for putting and providing us the PowerPoint in advance. It was enormously helpful, especially with the Airport Land Use Authority, to be able to familiarize myself with that information, not look down at that little screen in front of us or turn around and look at the big screen behind you. And it also allowed me to catch some things in the presentation that I wouldn't have gotten. So I know it's a good it's a heavy lift, but I just wanted to express my appreciation for having the ability to review those materials in advance.
All right.
Those
Thank you,
PowerPoints
Bruce.
in advance.
Anyone else?
I would mention lastly, Mr. Chair, that we do not have a meeting scheduled this time for July, which is normal for PCTPA. So our next meeting would be in August.
Be in August.
Unless you have anything different.
No, I think that's right. Just for my fellow board members, for those of you that have been joining us through Zoom, especially as the law potentially is changing end of September, I'd really encourage you, if you can, to get down to the Domes for in-person meetings. It would be useful for those of us who have not yet met in person to build those relationships and to get to know one another. So unless you've got some very strong resistance due to COVID, I would hope that we may see you in August here in the Domes, and potentially moving forward from here on out. I can't imagine a world in which, given how much we've all gotten involved in Zoom and the access that's created for our constituents, that there won't be some type of shift to allow for that. Obviously, our different jurisdictions have a difficult time affording the technology that might allow that. Mine certainly does, but I think there'll be an opportunity in the future for us to do some type of hybrid, but we have to assume at this point that will not exist.
And we will continue to endeavor to allow the public to utilize this new technology. It seems to have, as Mr. Garabedian pointed out, it seems to improve public participation. So we'll continue to do that, within the bounds of how we can do that.
Agree. All right. We move on to board direction to staff. Any board members have direction to staff? I see nothing in Zoom world, so we move on. Item L is a myriad of information items in your packet for your perusal. And if there is nothing else, an hour and 5 minutes late, we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.